Hello and welcome to my TED Talk. And today I'm going to be talking about Prismatic Hunter and why I think it's probably time for a few nerfs. If you've been playing any sort of PvP in this game for the past month since the final shape released, you would have realized by now that Prismatic Hunter is pretty strong in PvP, and there's data to support that. In the week before this week, aka the last Trials week, Prismatic Hunter saw a 35% representation in Trials player count, and Hunter overall saw a 50% player count representation in Trials, with Stompies accounting for 15 out of every 100 players in Trials. Isn't that crazy? Obviously, it's never a good thing when one class is one out of every two players in Trials, and that kind of representation has not meaningfully shifted as we've headed into Iron Banner, which will be continuing next week. So, what should be done? What's the problem with Prismatic Hunter? Does it even need to be nerfed? What abilities on Prismatic Hunter should be nerfed? Are these abilities overpowered in a vacuum? That's what I'm here to talk about. So, a couple things. I think there's a couple abilities on Prismatic Hunter that are overpowered in a vacuum. And I think there's a couple abilities on Prismatic Hunter that are overpowered in combination. And I'd like to talk about both types here. Now, if we're talking about overpowered in a vacuum, let's talk about the new super, Storm's Edge. Storm's Edge has taken PvP by storm. And it's leading to insane kill chains reminiscent of post-buff Striker Titan, launch Stasis Behemoth, and like launch Nova Warp. You hear Hunter activate the super, and you just know they're getting at least 4 kills with it. Which is not obviously healthy for PvP, even if you can only get it once a match. So how should it be nerfed? I think there's 2 things wrong with this super. I think the number 1 problem is that it's hard to read and is active for too long, which are technically 2 different problems, but I'm kind of bundling them into the same issue. I think number 2 is that it one-shots roaming supers. Let's start with the easy fix first. It should not one-shot roaming supers other than Golden Gun. Golden Gun, if you don't know, has low DR on, I believe, 6-shot and no DR on 3-shot. And both of them are pretty easy to kill, even with just a normal weapon, because they're the strongest supers in the game at a base level. Storm's Edge should not one-shot other supers. This is the same problem we ran into when Bungie discussed the reasoning for nerfing Nova Warp, a super which requires you to be point blank with your enemies and did not let you teleport long distances, even though you had access to, technically speaking, 2 different kinds of blink. And that also requires you to charge up a hit. Storm's Edge requires that you do neither. You throw a knife at somebody and you're up in their shit almost immediately. So, first change I would make to Storm's Edge, it should probably deal half or a little over half to someone who is in their super. But it should not kill them. That would put it in the same league as Shanebinder and Nova Warp in terms of Super v Super. I think that's completely fair. I don't think this thing should be able to one-shot people who are in, like, Berserker, for example. That doesn't make sense to me. Number 2 is the super is hard to avoid and hard to read, and it's up for a long time. So the secondary problem with Storm's Edge is that you have it up for a real long time. It has a roughly equivalent roaming time to Golden Gun, which is crazy to me. And doesn't even require line of sight, which was the only non-stringent requirement to make Golden Gun the best super in the game. Because you can teleport to somebody instantly. The way it works is you throw a knife at somebody, and you teleport to that knife and do a horizontal sweep about a second after you do that. On top of that, if you hit somebody with the knife that you used to throw the super, you will kill them too. So there's, you're oozing out of your pores with ways to kill people with this super. Um, I've seen people say that the super can be countered by jumping over it. First of all, I'm going to present a couple counter arguments to that. Number one, it's just about impossible to understand when the super is coming your way. And even if you are alert enough to be able to understand that, you have about half a second to respond to it, and that's not going to be enough time to jump over it, even if the hunter aimed at the ground. And guess what? They don't need to aim at the ground. Any hunter who's using this ability with any sort of intelligence, which is a lot to ask from a hunter, I know, will be aiming this at around waist or neck height, removing the ability for you to be able to dodge it at all. So, unless you feel like playing a mind game every time a hunter pops this in a match, which is going to happen, probably about 6 times in every match you ever play, that's not a viable solution. So, what can be done? Simple. Reduce the amount of time that it's active. That's it. Reduce it so that you need to be able to... You have to use the cast within about 2 or 3 seconds of each other. Maybe 1 or 2 for being really harsh. So that you can't kill a group of people with one, walk into an entirely new sight line, teleport and kill another group of people with one, walk back to the other spawn, and do it a 3rd time. You shouldn't be able to do that. You should more or less have to use the 3 charges you have on the super in succession. So that you can't just go around killing the entire map instantly with your 3 Thunder Crash charges. I think that would be sufficient, and it would still be an exceptionally powerful super because it's really hard to defend against. Speaking of abilities that are problematic everywhere, Threaded Spectre has been a problem since it's been introduced in PvP. Hunters are using it to, like, auto-detonate a bunch of Threadlings on people, and they more or less mitigated that. And then they added an exotic, which just made it way better. I think the problem with Threaded Spectre is that it arms instantly and has a lot of health. It's an annoying ability to deal with, even if they nerf those 2 aspects of it. But I think it's okay for Hunter to be a little annoying. They're kind of the little annoying subclass. So, if I were Bungie, I think what I would probably do is make it so that if a hunter dodges on top of you, the Threaded Spectre does not detonate. Give it like a 3-4 second arming time. That would be reduced to 0 if anybody shoots it. Or rather, like, an enemy shoots it. And I would also slightly reduce its health. Maybe by like 30-40%. It's so irritating to get rid of. And you need to shoot the Threadlings that come out of it anyway. So, it's very distracting to deal with. Which I think is a space of the game that does and should exist. See, like, Bleak Watcher turrets or the healing turrets, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I think it's a little too good at being a distraction right now. So if they just tone that down a little bit and make it so that it's not an auto I win button whenever somebody gets within 5 feet of you, that's fine. That are individually powerful. I want to talk about a couple of abilities that are powerful in combination, aka the new Wombo combo. For those who don't know, the Wombo combo was a combination of Smoke Bomb and Vortex Grenade that Night Stalker hunters were able to use in Destiny 1 to great effect, throwing both at the same time at somebody and killing them extremely quickly. Ever since then, there have been multiple purported quote-unquote Wombo combo successors. But in the final shape, I think we finally actually got one. And surprise, surprise, it involves Smoke Bomb again. Heading into the final shape, Bungie buffed 2 abilities, which would be present on the Prismatic Hunter kit, after, I suppose, feedback from hunters that those 2 abilities weren't very good. So, in typical Bungie fashion, they decided to make them better almost exclusively in PvP. So, what they did, first, for Storm Grenade, is they made it so that it has a 50% larger aggro radius from 4 meters to 6 meters. That means that when you stop within 6 meters of it, the projectiles start coming after you. Also, the projectiles attract to you more aggressively. Also, they linger for longer. It used to be 7 seconds, now it's 10 to 11 seconds. So, and then Smoke Bomb is an ability that, when thrown, will detonate when in proximity to a player. It will then blind you, slow your movement, and damage you. So as you can imagine, hunters can throw both of these abilities at once, essentially hitting you with 2 grenades, preventing you from moving outside of the range of the swarm grenade, and you get eaten alive. So I think that these abilities are also a little too strong on their own. And more than that, they're acting outside of their intended use, which is an area where Bungie tends to nerf things. So these are 2 abilities which are primarily designed to be preventative abilities. They're trap abilities. You put them down somewhere and you are you're either discouraging somebody from going through that area, or you're distracting them, like with hi baby girl, like with the radar ping on the smoke, or you're forcing them to take damage in order to enter an area, like with the swarm grenade. The problem with this is that these abilities are not being used as preventative measures or traps. They're being used to insta-kill people by throwing them on top of them. And I think the way to fix this is very simple. For Swarm Grenade, I have 2 different suggestions. The number 1 suggestion is revert the buffs. I was playing a lot of Swarm Grenade on Hunter in PvP prior to the final shape because I was getting exotic stockpiled so I can max out Rule's reputation. And when I was using Swarm Grenade, even though it's a class neutral grenade and I could have been using it on, say, Warlock, I was pleasantly surprised by how effective it was in PvP. I was doing really well with it. The moderate damage combined with Scorch meant that I was frequently catching people out and cleaning up easy kills. I just don't think these buffs were necessary. I think that you can revert the arming aggression on the grenade and the tracking aggression buffs and keep the longer uptime, 11 seconds. I think that's fine. But I don't think this grenade really needed to be buffed. Now, if you wanted to keep the buffs, I would say hand it a nerf that I think should go to the Snare Bomb, which is that they should both have an arming time. So what I mean by that is when you cast the ability on top of somebody, it shouldn't immediately detonate. It should take about a second or 2 in order to be active. Let's say 2.5, 3 seconds, something like that. So you throw it on top of somebody, and instead of immediately detonating and fucking them over, it doesn't do that because it's not what it's designed to do. It's a preventative ability, not an offensive ability. So if you do that to both of those, I think you can keep the buffs, and that would be fine. Other things in the sandbox. If you're a hunter main and you're watching this video, you might be like, how the hell can this asshole be talking about how his prismatic opponent is overpowered while he's running Speaker's Sight? Speaker's Sight is literally the only other thing to come out of the final shape that has seen any kind of notable play in PvP, and it's already been nerfed in typical Bungie Warlock fashion. Now, so to speak, it hasn't technically been nerfed. What they've done is they've quote-unquote temporarily disabled the ability of the exotic to generate orbs in PvP. And that's it. It can still do it in PvE. It hasn't had any of its other functionality changed. So, is that enough is the question. Bungie has said that they might revisit this decision at a later date and see if they can adjust it to where it can generate orbs in a manner that's acceptable. I don't think they're going to do that. What I think Bungie is doing here is being a little sneaky and seeing how the playtime, and rather the pick rate of Speaker's Sight is going to turn out post-buff, or post-nerf, rather. So if they see that Speaker's Sight has a high enough playtime post-nerf, I think they're just not going to re-enable it in PvP. And while I would be a little upset about that because it generating orbs in PvP opens up some build crafting potential, and the primary reason that this was nerfed was because it was in combination with Kavasov, which was also nerfed and is probably due for another nerf as one of the most annoying weapons to fight against in PvP. I do understand the apprehension. The main problem I feel with this exotic and the orb functionality is that it can generate orbs when you heal yourself. It doesn't say that on the exotic. It says healing allies occasionally spawns an orb of power. I believe this is every second or third healing instance, and I don't know if there's some sort of internal cooldown. I haven't seen any specific testing on it yet. If they were to bring this functionality back to PvP, here's what I would like to see to prevent it from becoming a degenerate strategy enabler. Number one, it should not spawn orbs when you heal yourself. I feel like the turret already targets the user a little too much. Sometimes I'll be chilling out in an area with some teammates, and one of my teammates is hurt, and I'm not, and it chooses to heal me anyway, even though they're clearly within range. I would like to see it prioritize hurt teammates more than unhurt users. Also, just shouldn't generate orbs when you heal yourself, because then you can like ricochet around yourself and like get an orb and get like a shorter super cooldown. It's not going to be healthy for trials. It's not a good idea. I think that if it doesn't already, it should also have some sort of healing internal cooldown, because I believe since the healing turret's rounds have a sort of AoE, that if it heals multiple people at once, those are all separate instances of healing and count towards generating an orb. That shouldn't be the case. Put a 2 or 3 second internal cooldown on it so that that can happen, and then I think you can bring it back. But like I said, if they don't bring back the orb generation on this thing, I don't really care. It's still pretty good. So do I think other aspects of this build need to be nerfed? Namely, do I think Benevolent Dawn or the turret itself need to be nerfed? My answer is no. In order to get the most effective version of the turret, you already need to be on Dawn Solar Warlock proper. You can't do it on Prismatic because you need the aspect Touch of Flame. Otherwise, the turret doesn't heal as much. So I don't think it's a problem. What about Benevolent Dawn? Is Benevolent Dawn a problem? Maybe. I think you're maybe getting a little too much energy back. Maybe a little too much. But I would be cautious about nerfing the ability regeneration of Benevolent Dawn too much, or rather Ember of Benevolence as it's called now, because that would invalidate the entire purpose of the build. People seem to forget what the trade-off of this build is. The trade-off of this build is that you can't kill people with your grenade. Obviously, that isn't a particularly strong argument because Healing Grenade is a very popular choice for any solar-based subclass in PvP and has been for a long time. But it's pretty significant here. You are more or less hard locked to Hellion, which is a middling at best aspect, and Touch of Flame if you want to get the most out of this build. And that's fine. I am a huge healer Warlock hater. I hate how Bungie has been trying to pigeonhole Warlocks into being healers basically ever since Forsaken. All of Warlock's more offensive supers, think Nova Warp, Shadebinder, Chaos Reach, have been nerfed, and to the point where they are very poor choices in PvP and PvE. While Well continues to see wrist slaps and Bungie continues shoveling out exotics that are expressly for the purpose of the Warlock helping their team. Think Boots of the Assembler, think Cenotaph, an exotic that literally does not provide any benefit to the user if you're playing by yourself. Your teammates need to help you get any benefit out of it. And the benefit, of course, is getting more special ammo so you can help your teammates by having higher div uptime. A very poorly thought out exotic design, in my opinion. But tangent over. I think that if Speaker's Sight is going to see any more specific nerfs, they could just leave the orb generation off in PvP, or significantly decrease the frequency by which you can generate orbs, by disallowing you to generate orbs, by healing yourself, and by reducing the frequency with which you can generate orbs by adding an internal cooldown. If they were to look at any subclass aspects, I would say don't. I don't think it's necessary. And furthermore, I think that more work needs to be done on this meta before we go nerfing the second best option to a 1 in 2 pick rate. Maybe deal with the elephant in the room, and then we can deal with like the pygmy hippopotamus in the room. Okay? And Titans will have their time in the sun again, I'm sure. They just got off a 3-year stretch of dominating the meta with overshield barricades. One more thing I want to talk about that is not PvP related is Still Hunt. Ever since the days of Gjallarhorn, I've always been extremely wary of metas where one option is the best pick for raid DPS, and right now, that is unquestionably Still Hunt for the overwhelming majority of raid encounters, including specifically end boss encounters. Still Hunt, rather, is still the reigning champion for Orcs, and for Nezarec, and for the Witness, and for Riven. It's basically the best choice for any boss that can be dived or has an easy to hit crit point. And the reason I think it should be nerfed is because it is specifically only usable on Celestial Hunter. You can use it in other classes, but you're both getting less damage and lower DPS relatively. So, not great. Let me tell you, I have not seen any Warlocks or Titans running Still Hunt. That's for sure. I think the problem with Still Hunt is that it's basically Izanagi without the downside, i.e. it's not chewing through ammo extremely quickly. So, what should be done? Celestial Hunter is already very good in raids, and I don't think nerfing Still Hunt will do anything to prevent it from being the case. Celestial was good running up to the final shape, and it's only gotten better as they have continued to buff both the exotic and the super. It is extremely potent. So, what I would like to see happen is I want to see Still Hunt not be able to generate a super with only 6 crit hits. If you get 6 kills, you should get a super. If you get 6 crit hits, you should get half a super. That's it. You should have to spend 2 mags in order to get a Celestial shot. I think that would be fair. It would still be a very good choice for PvP for endgame raids. But I don't think it would be the de facto mandatory choice. I think the day 1 raid raids for Salvation's Edge showed how much of an outlier this exotic was and how much of a outlier in the negative sense that Titans were. So I would like to see this rubbed down a little bit so that it doesn't become a massive problem in the future. That's basically all I wanted to talk here about today. I believe that if all these nerfs happen to Prismatic Hunter in the way that I predicted, and keep in mind, when I'm talking about these nerfs, I'm not just talking about what I would like to see to happen to Prismatic Hunter, because if I got what I wanted, Prismatic Hunter would be deleted from the game. I'm just kidding. But I'm going based on how Bungie tends to operate and the way they like to nerf things, which is usually they like to reduce the potency of effects before they, or rather, they like to reduce the frequency of effects before they reduce the potency of effects. So thinking they're going to want to touch the cooldown before they touch the power. Or in the case of the Smoke Bomb and Swarm Grenade, they want to touch being able to activate them instantly before they're touching how much damage they do on hit. So based on how Bungie tends to operate, I think they will get around to nerfing Prismatic Hunter maybe in Act 3 of Episode 1, if not Act 1 of Episode 2. Because they like to take their time on Hunter and Titan nerfs, but I think that they will be hitting these abilities. This isn't to say that Prismatic Hunter will be bad if all these nerfs come to pass. If all these nerfs come to pass, not only will Prismatic Hunter still be good and probably the #1 choice in PvP, it'll probably still be the same loadout because all of these abilities are still going to be really, really good. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that. If you have any comments or questions, if you somehow watch this long, feel free to leave a comment down below telling me how I'm a filthy biased warlock man, or if you have constructive criticism or questions, feel free to leave those too.